Well, what if I told you that in 18th century France, there lived an opera singer who would challenge people to sword fights in the street? That is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the life of Julie d'Aubigny, also known as Mademoiselle Maupin. Very little is known about Maupin's incredibly colorful life, at least until now. Camille Rogers studied Mademoiselle Maupin while they were a doctoral student at the University of Toronto. They've been doing their research on the life and times of this incredible artist and have big plans to spread her stories. Camille joins us this morning from Toronto. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. First of all, where did you first hear about Mademoiselle Maupin?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly, like the specific moment, but it was definitely sort of like an internet rabbit hole situation. It must have been like 2017, 2018. I was trying to decide, as doctoral students will know the struggle, trying to decide what to really narrow my focus onto. I already was really interested in like France in the early 18th century. I love that music. And then she just sort of fell into my lap, and it really felt too good to be true, and almost still does, because I am bisexual. I'm a mezzo soprano. I identify as non-binary. And so I was just like, searching around the internet as one does, and I found, ran across Julie Daubigny, who was bisexual, a mezzo soprano, and we don't know exactly how she would have identified if she lived today, but definitely gender queer in some way. She wore men's clothing a lot. So it was just like, this is too perfect. And instantly I was like, well, this is obviously what I'm writing my dissertation on. And yeah, and then of course all my research came from there.
So, as you were starting that research into Mademoiselle Maupin, you're finding out all these facts about her life. What are some of the Cliff's Notes versions that you can give us, so we don't give away too much of your big project? But can you tell us a little bit about Mademoiselle Maupin and what her life was like in 18th century France?
Yeah, so the really interesting thing about her was we don't know all that much for sure. We know the things that we have primary documents for are she worked at the Paris Opera. We know some of the roles she sang because we have, like programs and things like that. And she shows up on, salary records. But other than that, we really don't have anything primary, like really hard evidence. Everything else comes from what we would call secondary sources, which is like people writing secondhand accounts about her. And in her case in particular, a lot of the time, these are things that were written about her like long after she had died, decades, sometimes even centuries after. And so as it's a historian's nightmare, because it's like I have no idea whether any of these are true. Some of them, it's not like I can say it's 100% not true, because it's possible that these historians writing in the like 17 and 1800s had access to documents that we don't have access to anymore, that were destroyed or lost. So I can't say for sure, oh well, this is definitely not true, but I also don't know if it's true, because those historians in the 17 and 1800s didn't cite anything. They didn't say, yeah, this is exactly where I got this information, so we can't check it. So it is really a struggle. But the Cliff's Notes of things that I, in my sort of researcher's opinion, are almost certainly true, are that she, obviously we know she did sing at the Paris Opera. She was an opera singer. And it seems pretty clear that there was something going on with her sexuality and gender. She was queer in some way. And this is commented on in like pretty much all of the sources. So it's really consistent in the way that it isn't necessarily with some other historical figures. So we would probably call her bisexual today. They didn't really have that word back then, but she fell in love with both men and women very openly, which of course, as you might imagine, was rare in that time period. And she also definitely dressed in men's clothing some of the time, also something unique about her. And she did get into a lot of sword fights. That's also something that's very consistent. So those are the big things that I think we can be pretty sure about. And then there's lots of other like more specific stories about her that are so fun, but it's like, ugh, I don't know. These could just be rumors. They could be gossip, but they're still really fun to learn about and imagine that maybe they might be true.
What kinds of accounts did you come across about these legendary sword fights? Like, are you finding like accounts from her adversaries saying, "You'll never guess who I just got in a tussle with outside of the Paris Opera"? Is that how this is working?
So not. I don't believe we have any firsthand accounts from people who did fight her. One of the most famous stories, it actually, well, this one didn't end up being a duel. She challenged one of her co-workers at the opera. There was this tenor named Duménil who, by all accounts, was like very rude. He would like show up drunk. He would like harass all of the female opera singers. So Julie was like, I'm not having that. And she challenged him to a duel, but he refused. And then she kind of like slapped him around a little bit, stole his snuff box apparently, and kind of taught him a lesson that way. But that one didn't actually end up turning into a duel. But there are other ones, and again, these are possibly true. There's a really famous story that she was kind of being amorous with a woman at a ball, a masquerade ball. And then three relatives or suitors of this woman all challenged her to a duel all at once. And so she went outside and defeated them all at once and then had to sort of lay low for a while. Again, that it's such a fun story. That one seems like one that might have been embellished a little bit, but there might be a kernel of truth in there. So things like that. She was always either people were like offended by her behavior, or she was sort of um, defending herself or the women around her, which I think is a pretty good reason to fight a duel.
Absolutely, especially when it comes to a chance to fight a tenor. I'm told that they are an insufferable bunch. Um,
100%.
so now that that's all going on outside of the opera house, what can you tell us about what Julie d'Aubigny was doing inside the opera house? What kind of repertoire was she cataloged to have sung? And do we know what she sounded like? What kind of were there reviews of her performances?
There are some reviews, not not particularly specific. A lot of people do comment on the fact that she had a lower voice than they were used to. So that's why, yeah, again, like the term mezzo wasn't really being used, especially not in France. That's
Mm-hmm.
Italian, but yeah, she does seem to have like a lower or richer tone than your typical soprano, and and she was praised as like an amazing performer and an amazing singer. But of course, beyond that, we can't know exactly what she sounded like. The types of roles she performed, she rose through the ranks of the Paris Opera. It was very much sort of a hierarchical system. You started off with small roles, and then you kind of graduated to more leading roles. And this is part of what I talk about in my doctoral research that I found super fascinating. It seems like, and no one I couldn't find any composers actually writing about this or commenting about this, but it does really seem like they did sometimes typecast her.
Hmm.
Like she played a lot of like warrior princesses, or I did find a couple of roles. There's no actual trouser roles in the French opera of that time, which is when like a woman plays a male character. They didn't really do that in French opera. That was more of an Italian thing. But Julie did play a couple of roles where she was playing a woman. The character was a woman, but then that character cross-dressed in the course of the opera. So that happened once or twice. So it makes me wonder if, these were kind of little winks to the audience to say, like, what this person is like outside of the
Hmm.
opera. So let's kind of play on that inside of the opera and in the roles that we're casting her
Art's imitating life in that sense.
in. Definitely.
In a similar fashion to why perhaps you seem to have been drawn to Julie d'Aubigny's story, with the art of the past really speaking into your own lived experience. Um, when you handed in your dissertation about Mademoiselle Maupin, what made you decide that you wanted to continue this journey with this 18th century larger than life character and take it into a whole new realm of storytelling.
Yeah, so I kind of always had this in the back of my mind, writing the dissertation. I was just like, this person is so cool. Everyone needs to know about her. And I would not expect many people to read an entire dissertation. That's a lot to ask. So I always was sort of thinking, what ways can I tell her story that are more accessible and more fun, because it is also a really fun story. So I had already my final performance for my doctorate. I collaborated with my friend Colin McMahon, who is the composer of the piece. We created like a little mini one person, we were calling it a cantata at that point because it was just for voice and piano. And I performed that as my final doctoral performance. And we loved it so much that we decided to expand it into this full sort of mini chamber opera, and decided to do a filmed version of it so that it can reach as many people as possible and as many people can find out about Julie and learn about her story.
What is it like to stand in Julie's shoes on the stage as you perform as her in this final cantata?
Yeah, it's really cool. And also, so there's this piece, but I also have, as part of my dissertation, I learned a couple of excerpts from roles that she sang. And that was so cool as well. It's wild as classical musicians that we have these pieces. If you just think about it for a second, it's like we're almost traveling through time. We have this music that was written down. It's hundreds of years old, and yet we can still create it ourselves in the present. And so that was so cool to sing things that we know that she sang. That was just kind of mind blowing to me. And so we actually in the opera do incorporate, we take little snippets of melodies and things like that,
Mm.
things from the music that she sang, and sort of work it into the piece to give it that flavor and then also to have that historical connection. But actually, the piece does really kind of meditate on that connection between me and her. It sort of is bookended by these little framing devices of it's I start out as me and then
Hmm.
sort of put on the mantle of Julie. And so that is kind of baked into the piece, that idea of me connecting with her. And also the idea that like the version of her that I'm imagining is my imagination, because again, there's so much we don't know for sure about her.
Hmm.
So I can't necessarily connect to the real her because that's impossible for us at this stage um, in history. But I'm still connecting with her in my own way, in a way that feels meaningful. And it's just so fun. She's such a fun character, and um, Colin has brought her to life so beautifully through the music. There's a ton of like playfulness and kind of sassiness, which I think is very much in her character that comes out in the music. And so it feels really fun to embody that.
What sort of reaction has your performances, your TikToks as Mademoiselle Maupin, what sort of reaction have these things been receiving from your audience as they learn more about Julie d'Aubigny through you?
Yeah, I feel like everyone who learns about her is just like, as I was, just sort of mind blown that she was a real person. Because it's wild to think about living so openly at that time period, when there were very few circumstances that someone could do that. You find these snippets of queerness throughout history, but a lot of the time they're really hidden, and really you have to really dig and sort of read between the lines to find them. But she seems to have been so open about it, which is amazing. So I think everyone who encounters her story is just kind of blown away by that and just like so
Hmm.
excited to learn more, is what I found.
So, we're talking to you in Toronto today, Camille. You're originally from the Lethbridge area of Alberta. What would it have meant to you growing up as a queer artist on the prairies to have known about Mademoiselle Maupin as you were growing up?
Yeah, definitely. This is one of the big reasons why I wanted to make this piece as well. Like I always think of that younger version of me, just like not having the information, like just having no models to look to as to how I might want to express my gender or sexuality. And so that's a big kind of motivator behind basically all of the art that I make is I want to make sure that people know that there are options out there and know that queer people in all our different forms have existed forever. We're not something new. Just because we got sort of covered up by history doesn't mean that we didn't exist in, various forms, even if we wouldn't have used the same words to describe ourselves. We were there. So, yeah, that's something that's really important to me.
What is the next steps as you continue to explore sharing Julie Daubigny's stories? You have the TikTok, and I understand you're working towards making a film. What's the status of that?
Yeah, so actually, just very recently, Colin finished the score, the first version of the score, the kind of piano vocal reduction. So the full piece is finished, and then Colin's going to work on arranging that for some strings as well, a little chamber ensemble, and then we're hoping to do a little workshop in the spring, and then film probably fall of 2025 and then share it with the world. And in the meantime, I'm hoping to just share as much content on the TikTok and the social media as possible just to get people excited and yeah, just to share Julie's story and make sure that we can reach as many people as possible because I think this is a story that could be really meaningful to a lot of people.
What will it mean to you when all of this is done and you are sharing this repertoire in the fall of 2025? What will that mean to share it with audiences back in your home community in Alberta?
Yeah, I think that'll feel so good. It'll feel like a very full circle moment. And I also really hope, like, one of the reasons we um, are still creating a piano vocal version, like, I imagine someone in their undergrad who is just starting to explore their queerness could, like, sing it or at least sing part of it. Because as well, I think back to my sort of youngest child self,
Hmm.
um, and how much it would have meant to me to see just any trans or genderqueer people around. But also my sort of like younger adult self when I was really coming into that part of myself. Um, the especially as a classical musician, it can be so overwhelmingly straight and hetero, and you're singing all these opera arias that are like very straight. And it would be nice to have some other options. So I hope other people sing it as well and can embody Julie and get to know her and perform the piece as well. That's another big hope.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share more about Julie Daubigny and this amazing project. We'll be sure to look out for it as it continues to develop. If people want to support the project, how can they do so?
Yeah, uh, so we are crowdfunding. We have most of our funding provided by the Canada Council for the Arts, which is amazing. But we just want to top it up a little bit to make sure that we can have the best film possible for everyone. Yeah, so if people want to donate, the best way to find us is either to go to our social media, which is La Maupin Film on basically every platform, or at least most of them. Or you can go to the Opera Company's page, which is operaqto.com, and find the production. You can scroll down, there's buttons to donate and learn more and all of that good stuff.
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time, Camille, and all the best as you continue to develop La Maupin.
Thanks so much for having me.